if everyone is a channel, what's the consequence of that? If everyone can now talk to each other, how do we feel? And I ask this question again and again in my talks, and every single time I do that, the answer that comes back from the audience is we feel overwhelmed.
You're listening to Simon Scriver's amazingly ultimate fundraising superstar podcast, talking all things fundraising, charities, nonprofits, and more. Here's your host, as always, Simon Scriver.
I recently came back from a fundraising conference in Italy where the closing plenary was all about the future of fundraising. Now, they were looking at the year 2025, which isn't too far ahead, and for some reason there was spaceships involved, and I didn't really understand that. But I started thinking about the future of fundraising and wanted to find someone who has some strong opinions and who seems to have a clue about what's going on, because I think a lot of people are just taking stabs in the dark. So I reached out to my friend, Richard Turner, who is joining me today on the podcast. Good morning, Richard.
Good morning, Simon. And thank you very much for inviting me on your fabulous podcast.
Well, thanks for joining me. I know you're a busy man. You seem to be speaking at conferences. You seem to be all over the place.
Well, I like to preach. I like to sort of spread the word if people are willing to listen, and I think it's an important time. And it's difficult, isn't it? We can all feel that sort of anxiety or stress as fundraisers. I've been through that. I'm sure you've been through that, and I think whatever I can do to help people see the light, I'll see what I can do my best to do that.
It all sounds very evangelical.
Yes, I didn't mean to be
right off the bat.
Yeah, it feels like a sort of personal mission, I think, in wanting to share thinking, which I think is just gets me excited about fundraising again, instead of feeling, just battered.
Well, yeah, I mean, you always seem like you're enjoying what you're talking about. You always seem like you're enjoying the experience. But the funny thing about you actually is when I'm at conferences, you seem to be mentioned more than I see you speaking. I always see a lot of people mentioning your success at SolarAid and quoting you, and some of the things that you're trying to push out, they're getting repeated. So there's something in this word that you're spreading is being spread, because I'm hearing it.
Well, that's fascinating, because actually, in a funny way, that's a microcosm of that new paradigm, is get other people to talk about your mission story, because it's more powerful coming from them. So that's really great to hear, because it's in the retelling that, that it gets people's attention, and, so that's great. I'm really pleased to hear that. Thanks.
Well, let's dive into that a bit. But first of all, for people who are listening who maybe haven't met you or haven't seen you speak or haven't heard of you, who are you? Who is Richard Turner?
God, yeah, great. Well, I've been fundraising now for 30 years. That's if you include my time as doing student RAG, which actually I learned so much. So not to belittle that also. And I did some fabulous, really enjoyed kicked off my career at Oxfam. But then joined an organization called Farm Africa, had an amazing boss by the name of Dr. Christy Peacock, who now runs a social enterprise in Kenya. Wonderful woman. Really loved my time there. And I think that was my first big break in fundraising. And then, I've had a number of roles. I've worked agency side as well. Worked ActionAid, where I headed up fundraising. But it's at SolarAid, I think I had the most fun. And I was deliberately seeking a place where I could experiment, because I could see things were no longer working. And I worked there for 5 years as chief fundraiser. And I'm still back, I still sort of work alongside them, advising and coaching them. And, there's just a wonderful culture there. So now I do my own thing, blog, preach, speak, and, love to work with organizations who want a little help just to sort of speed up that transition to this sort of new way of fundraising, I think. So
you're working with a bunch of different organizations now, but you're still, SolarAid can't really get rid of you. You still have a presence.
They're just great, because once you've got the right culture, I think there's that willingness to try things, and they're going through a new growth phase. So no, it's a delight to work, because that's what sort of frees up your thinking. It's in the doing where you suddenly see how things fall into place. And it's all very well having some nice theory, but the practical application of it, that can obviously be the tough thing. But how do you actually make this stuff work?
Well, SolarAid strikes me, even in the name of the organization, they're a forward-thinking organization. They're talking about, the word innovation is thrown around a lot, but they're actually willing to try these new things and nurture that. And that seems to be what you're all about, is the future, is looking forward, is real change. You're a big believer in change.
Yeah, and it's going in the right direction. One of the things I loved about SolarAid is they would embrace failure, even in the program, even more so in the program in Africa, and they would learn from it and analyze it, and they would make leaps from that. And I think a lot of organizations, certainly from a fundraising perspective, I've seen brush failure under the carpet. And that's where, that's a mistake in this very fast changing world. You need to be bold enough to try things, have that courage to try new things, learn from them. And it doesn't, as long as you're going in the right direction, it really doesn't matter. And I think that's the key takeout I've learned in recent years.
Yeah, I saw you wrote on one of your blogs, if you're on the right path, it doesn't matter if you stumble or if you fall over, you're still going the right way. But we're on the wrong path, or a bunch of us are on the wrong path.
I think we have a outdated, I would call it an old model, maybe it's the current model, and I don't think it helps. And I think there's instances of really brilliant fundraising, but it keeps being slotted in to a square peg in a round hole. And I therefore think we completely need to rethink that model, just so it sort of makes us more effective and more efficient. And I think if you wind back and see, particularly in the UK, the look at the root causes behind all those things that happened and the adverse coverage we had and the regulation, you start to understand the reason why it's not working. And then you start to understand, okay, if that's the real root cause, what will work.
So you're talking about that kind of spate of scandals or perceived scandals in the UK, lots of bad coverage in the press. We got a lot of it in Ireland as well. But that feeling that everyone was turning on the previously trusted and loved charities, that went on for quite a while. I suppose we're still kind of feeling that. What is the root of that? Why did that come about?
Well, I could see that coming. I remember when I joined ActionAid in 2008, and although we did some really brilliant stuff around emergency appeals, we could see a slight decline in attracting new supporters and donors, and we just couldn't understand why. And then I sort of left in frustration, because I was trying to figure it out, and I think, like many, I was just reacting to the symptoms. And I think what the sector tended to do is, okay, things aren't, we're not getting the responses we need, so let's do more of it. It's that sort of British thing of, let's just shout louder.
Yes.
And do more of what isn't working. And that's what got us into trouble. The epiphany for me was, I was sort of in between jobs. I felt like a broken fundraiser, really. And this was before I came across SolarAid, and I read everything I could that's out there by all sorts of thought leaders, not necessarily in fundraising. In fact, most of them were outside fundraising. And the same sort of core message was coming up again and again when you looked at the sort of world of marketing. So there's guys like David Meerman Scott in America, and in the UK, Grant LeBoff, he's got a book called Sticky Marketing, were really, really great helps. And their core message was that the world has changed now, because for the first time in history, many-to-many means of communication is now possible, and everyone is now a channel. The reason I think this helps explains why things are no longer working is because if everyone is a channel, what's the consequence of that? if everyone can now talk to each other, how do we feel? And I ask this question again and again in my talks, and every single time I do that, the answer that comes back from the audience is we feel overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And so what do? We filter, and we don't want to be interrupted anymore. We've got plenty to deal with, thank you very much. And so therefore, if you're trying to do interrupt style marketing and fundraising, you either have to dial up the noise to make up that shortfall, or you've got to find another way. And I think the answer is to find another way, not do more of what doesn't work, because that's just going to lead to the crash, actually, that I think hit the UK some years back, and that to many extent we're still recovering from.
Because, I mean, well, for a start, nobody likes more and more noise. If you just get louder and louder, that's when people start to get the backup and people start to complain, I think.
And everyone is now a channel. So not only can they complain, they have a means to do so. And that can be picked up very, very quickly. So it has a double whammy, if you like.
Yeah. So why is this come about? Is it all, it's taking a step back, is it all technology based? Is it the fact that any dickhead can have a podcast, anyone can suddenly have a blog, anyone can suddenly get a self-publish a book? Is it just technology that has allowed us to do that, or are we, is there like a human evolution in this?
No, I think that's a big factor, and the big change. I think we all thought it was the sort of recession that was kicking in, but the big change was the smartphone, and particularly the iPhone, and that kicked in around 2007, 2008, and I think you're absolutely right. Everyone, you are a channel. A charity now needs to think of themselves as a media organization, as all its staff and its supporters and stakeholders. And there is the opportunity. That's the epiphany of, actually, you can harness this to your advantage, but you need to think completely differently, because it needs to move away from interrupt style marketing, getting money out of people, to how can we get people to share our mission story? And that was the little breakthrough I had. And when I joined SolarAid, I was so excited by this thinking. I said, are you up for doing things a little differently? They were. And that's when we went on this sort of learning curve of trying to apply a completely different approach, I would say, to fundraising.
And it worked, and I might ask you a little bit about that later. But I want to ask you, you mentioned there one of the problems people fear about this is the feeling that it's overwhelming. And I wonder, is the other fear of it the fear of losing control? Because, if everyone's a channel, if your message is being delivered by others, there's only so much control you have over that, or is there? I mean, I know, not to go back to the old school methods, but obviously there's still a big place for this. If you think of like community fundraising on a very practical level, we get scared sometimes if our volunteers are running an event, because suddenly they mess up our logo, suddenly they say something which is not quite on brand. Is this a really scary time for anyone who's trying to control their brand, or how do we get over that fear?
Yes, so we think that through. If you're going to have to accept you're going to lose control, so what do you need to do? You need to be really crystal clear on what your story is, that elusive why that gets talked about, and you need to invest time and resources to get that absolutely right, so that people can quickly get what your mission is and relay it to others in lots of different ways. And I just find a lot of organizations have lost that. Someone said to me the other day that the why has been sort of battered out of charities, because they've tended to focus on response-driven fundraising, and they use whatever message gets the best response. So you get multiple stories, different narratives coming from organizations, and what you need is a consistent narrative that is like, and I think of it like, think of a pond with lots of little drops emanating out. And if you're getting the same message reinforced by different people, and of course, the people they're talking to, their networks are more likely to listen to them than they are to your charity. So they've got the attention, and the attention is so precious now. It's just reinforces what's out there, and it's like hearing something for the third or fourth time and going, you know what, and that's what suddenly then gets other people's attention, and you're more likely to have more inbound leads and offers of help because others have recommended you. But it means really understanding what is the reason you exist, what's your ambition, really getting that absolutely right. And I just don't think organizations spend enough time pinning that down and revisiting, what was the reason they were created, and what's their ambition now. And
is it about, are you talking about simplifying it? Are you talking about, you talked about stickiness, and I know there's a lot of books, I've read a couple of books about this idea of stickiness, ideas that stick. Is it about finding a way to deliver it that people stick, or is that kind of dumbing it down? Because there are organizations, someone like Oxfam does have hugely different programs in hugely different countries, and it becomes very hard to break it down like that. Is it possible for every organization to simplify it to that level? Yeah, what was the spark? So I'll give you a great example. I had the fortune to do some work with the Royal British Legion last year. Now, you'd think they'd be a really traditional organization, but if you look at their whats, they do lots of they do lots of great work. But their why, the reason I give is around remembrance. I give because my uncle died at the fall of Singapore. That's the why. And I have a story. I have a story to tell. And if you get me to tell it, I'll probably get quite emotional. And others will tell it too. And I think what they did really well last year, particularly for the Poppy Appeal, is they encouraged people to share their story. What was their family story? It wasn't about pulling down, here's what we do. It was, please share your story of remembrance. And I think it's getting that essence absolutely right. And if an organization, one of the oldest organizations, UK charities there is, can get that right, then I think others can too. So spending time to really get that right, because then you've got a consistent story that will emanate out. The best example I use, we took this inspiration when we were at SolarAid, thinking, what should we set? We used the Kennedy speech of '61, where he said, we're going to land a man on the moon by the end of the decade. And it makes me think, well, if Kennedy, if America can set an ambition and a narrative and a story, because behind that he was basically saying, went on to say, isn't it, don't ask what America can do for you, but what can you do for America? He was setting up a narrative that everybody could use. So I think any organization of any size, Oxfam, to the SolarAid and so on, can apply this sort of thinking, but find what is the consistent narrative that it needs. Is there a risk there? I mean, for someone like Kennedy, it didn't finish out the best. The best, right? I mean, but in the grand scheme, I suppose maybe it did, in terms of the moon landing. But do we risk our organizations, like if they, if we put it in the hands of the many, or we put it outside of us? Is there a risk that we lose ourselves, or we lose that total control? Well, then it comes about the mission, so you've got to be really clear on what the mission is, because what I've also learned is that if you're clear about the mission, and then people can help you in all sorts of other ways. So money is clearly one, but it might be that they know a corporation or a foundation, or they can help in some other means too. And clearly that's what really matters, isn't it? Is, are you delivering on the mission? Not necessarily are you just getting the increased response rates on your appeals or your campaigns. But you're right, it is about letting go a little bit, but it is I think it's an extraordinary force that you can put to your advantage if you're really clear on what your mission is, what your narrative is, and yes, set that loose, and then be ready. You've got to be much more prepared to react to inbound offers of help and support than I think we have in the past. The tendency is, if I was to send an email to some info at most charities, they probably won't look at it for a day or so, and then they'll get back to me. They need to be back to me quickly, because that's when they've got my attention, and then they engage me to say, okay, it's interesting what you're offering. Can we talk a little bit more? And just what the opportunity is there. Well, actually, I do that mystery shopping experiment, as I think you know, and the average response time from an info at address is 3 days,
Sure.
and about 50% of organizations don't reply at all. So that's obviously not what we're trying to do here.
And that's the most precious thing, your attention. So
Yeah.
when you press send, you're really excited. And, as those hours tick away, your level of excitement is going to dwindle and dwindle.
Yeah.
And
Well,
so,
it's like spinning a plate on top of a stick, isn't it? It's like you have that momentum, but if someone doesn't keep spinning it, it just starts to wobble.
yeah.
We just get distracted. Talk to me a bit about inbound versus outbound, because I'm conscious, we can't sit there waiting for inbound. I mean, obviously we're not if we're doing all this work. But where does the call to action fit in this? Because people need to be asked to do something specific. Or do they in this new paradigm?
Well, I think you can think. You need to think. What are the ways to give value and get my attention? So, and another, because I'm sort of seeing these examples now a lot more. And so I suffer a little bit from asthma, partly because we've taken on a puppy. Only asthma guy got really fantastic advice, and so I made a donation, without hesitation. And then I got a whole load of emails over the course of a couple of months. I even kept them all, and they were all about donating and fundraising. And it was, and then something changed. I don't know if there's a change in strategy or thinking. And now I get these lovely emails from Dr. Andy. And Dr. Andy gives me some great advice on how to use an inhaler, or just little tips. I'll read them and I will share them. And then every so often they might say, oh, by the way, we've got some spaces in a marathon if you're interested in running.
Yeah.
Now they've got my attention, and I could see, I continue to get advice. Of course, I will probably give to them again because I'm getting value from them. And so it's just thinking a lot more creatively about what is the content that you can now create that keeps people's attention. And then when you have an appeal or an ask, then of course they're going to support you. So it does mean about thinking in a different way and getting me to champion your cause, because if I champion your cause to my network of friends, absolutely, I'm going to contribute. And I might contribute in many other ways other than just a sort of straightforward one-off gift.
Well, if you get a really good piece of advice, you're much more likely to forward that on to your friends than you are an appeal, than it is if they're just asking you. So you do have to bring that value. I do love when you're on a mailing list and you see the change of the head of fundraising has left, and suddenly the mails go really shit, or they get really, really good. And you can actually see the tone of it. It's happened so many times.
Which isn't that great though? In a way, that shows the importance of leadership, and that you can start to make that difference. But it's about going in the right direction. So going back to what we were saying earlier, as long as they're going into that space, it doesn't quite matter if they get things wrong. They will learn as they go, as opposed to the wrong direction, which is continuing to bombard me and thinking, well, if we send out more asks and requests, we'll make up for that shortfall that we're not getting every time we send one out. So it's just that different way of thinking. If everyone is a channel, how can you get people to share your mission story to their networks? And I think that's the paradigm. And it's not about how to get money out of me. It actually doesn't matter whether you get money out of me. What matters is, because you don't know who I know, and that is the beauty, Simon, in this world, because it's not as if I'm recommending a book or to buy a camera. It could be that a ordinary volunteer or supporter has links to a foundation, a corporation, a civil servant, who knows. So get them excited about your mission story, and let them loose.
Well, the world is tiny, isn't it? I mean, that 6 degrees of separation, kind of a myth for a while, I think, but now it is. Everyone is so connected, and it's the UK and Ireland especially, and other countries, they're so small. If you really want to get to someone or get into some company or get into some trust, there's a very short path there, if people are willing to go to help you along that path. Yeah,
and we saw this time and time again at SolarAid, where where you'd go into a company and and you'd find out the reason you'd been invited in was because an employee had made a donation, had been inspired because they had a solar light in their hand, and that's what sort of led to that moment. And so don't underestimate. And word of mouth has always been the best marketing tool, but it can really be done at scale. So I absolutely get you need to have that call to action in terms of what is it that people are contributing towards, and I think be smarter about it as well. There's a tendency of old style. Your £3 could do this. I hate that phrase. Could
yeah.
We know it's not going to buy a mosquito net, or surely there are much better ways to be far more authentic about what will for all your outputs. What do those inputs, donations achieve, and to really convey that instead of sort of little tricks that are trying to almost mislead me into giving.
That's interesting. Yeah, I'd never really kind of pictured that. And on a practical level, talk to me on a practical level. I suppose that there's two things I want to ask you here. Firstly, what an individual fundraiser is going to do, but also how we get the organization on board with this. So start with we've got a small charity or a medium charity. There's only one fundraiser in there who's responsible for this. What does this new paradigm look like for them Monday to Friday? How does their day change in terms of rolling something like this out? Because I'm always afraid of things being too vague. And then when the person gets and sits in front of their computer and goes to, start work, they don't know what to do differently. So what do we need to do differently?
So the first thing is understand what's changed, and understand that, the consequences of everyone is a channel, because then you're going in the right direction, and trying to get permission to work in that space. So you're not working against the chief executive or the trustees. But I think more than ever, people can see the symptoms of, the old ways, current ways don't work. So use that to your advantage and say, these are the reasons this doesn't work, but the reason they don't work is also the opportunity. And then, you at least got a bit of time, and I think you need a good year to really sort of get this in place, if not a bit longer. Then the first thing is, find that why. Is it clear? If you ask 10 people in your organization, what's your why or your mission? Do you get roughly the same answer? We're going to land a man on the moon type thing. If not, then you need to do some work on finding your ambition and your why, and that can take time. Take time to get it really, really good. And if you're struggling, get external help. But and you'll know when you find it, it'll feel emotional, because nearly always those big ambitions are emotional. It's it's the sort of equivalent of the NSPCC full stop type sort of mantra campaign. And then when you do that, you now know what you believe in, don't you? You know your why. So the next question to answer is, who believes in what we believe? Who are our natural advocates that would spread our message? And that could be by just getting to know your supporters a bit better, because then you can start to create content aimed at a particular target group that will appeal to them and get their attention, because they share your beliefs. And then it's about getting not just you on your own, but your entire organization creating content to that message. So give Solar Aid, we gave all staff permission to blog whatever they wanted about what they were doing, and all of a sudden we had this fantastic content that people had sort of self-edited and made sure there weren't any spelling mistakes, and that we could repost if we wanted to. And then take that further. How can you get supporters to start sharing that content too? And it gives, the other thing I get really excited about, I know supporter experience is in the donor experience, but this real strategic reasons for it, doesn't it? Because give me such a great experience that I will share it with my friends. That's the new mantra, because I am a channel. It's not just, because the supporter experience is in and people will give more. It's because I'm a channel. So invest in that. Are you doing handwritten thank you cards? You better be. Are you phoning donors up just to say thank you very much? What can you do to make giving online just something a little bit more engaging than just so there's so much to do. When that info app comes in, how many hours does it take to react to it? I think get all those little things in place, you'll be surprised at what we used to call it the magic at SolarAid. Once a month something surprising would happen and we go, oh, that was a bit of luck. And then it would happen sort of a couple of times a month, sort of once a week, where you sort of get something which felt like luck, but when you unpacked it, was as a result of all of that sort of foundation work that you put in place. And it just feels solid. You're sort of building, it's a bit like building one of those dry stone walls, as opposed to having a leaky bucket that you're constantly having to fill, which is the sort of analogy which the sector seemed to use for some time.
It's like the phrase that I love is the harder you work, the luckier you get. And I've said that snottily to a couple of bosses in my time who've told me it's been really lucky that this money's come in. I was like, yeah, I worked really hard. I got really lucky. But yeah, you create these opportunities. So then on the flip side of it, what I'm asking you about as well is the bosses, the CEOs. You mentioned earlier about, it might take a year, it might take more. Here is a fundamental problem in our sector that, if we're targeted, as most fundraisers are targeted on this year, if their board only cares about, the next 12 months finances, how do we get buy-in on this? How do we get them to understand that we have to be doing stuff that isn't just, I'm going to spend $100 and bring in $200, because this model doesn't line up with that.
Yeah, so I think there's two things. So one is if you're moving away from response-driven fundraising, that should free up resources that you can start to reallocate elsewhere. Because that is expensive, depending on the size of the organization, of course. But you can say, let's move that sort of acquisition budget and start investing in these other areas and do them brilliantly. You need to find that why. What are the ways you can create great content and so on. But the other thing is to get the board and the CEOs excited about the mission again, and thinking about the next 10 years. What is the mission of the organization? And make them understand that in finding this, this is the core first step in what we now need to do for fundraising. Make them one and the same. And I think that can help them thinking about, okay, yeah, it is about where we need to be in the next 5 to 10 years. Not about what we need to, what we need to bring in the next year, and in doing so, you can start to share, show them that by doing this approach, will not just bring in money; it will bring in mission-related benefits too. I'll give you an example. When at SolarAid, we set our Kennedy equivalent, our big, hairy, audacious goal of eradicating the kerosene lamp from Africa.
Wow!
And, we did this event with a whole host of supporters. It wasn't many, about 30 or so people who we thought would be interested. They sort of shared our values. And at the end of it, this guy comes up to me and he says, I work for a Chinese solar company and we believe in renewable energy for all. But we'll raise some money for you, but let's do something different. And what they did is they helped SolarAid develop one of the world's most affordable solar lights. And it now sells in Africa for about $5 or so. We can get it to Africa for about $3, and then you let entrepreneurs make a small margin on it. And that's a game changer. That's not about money. That's about helping deliver on the mission.
Wow.
But what I love about it, it came about through a fundraising event. It wasn't, an event that we put on. It wasn't one that was set up by the sort of programmatic team. It was all about in delivery of the message. So I think it's getting that leadership team excited about the mission again, and really distilling, what's the message that goes behind that.
That just sounds very lucky, Richard. Lucky that you organised that event, and lucky that you identified 30 people, and lucky that someone had put in years of research into developing the solar lamp. That's a lot of luck. Yeah,
it's a lot of luck. Another luck was we did. I remember we had to do one of these stands at a festival. The sort of thing where you take a lot of effort, and We decided then,
like a music festival, like all drunk people and
sort of. It was it was Ben and Jerry's festival. They sort of took over
yeah?
a park in London for a weekend.
Oh wow.
And we decided not to do the usual thing of trying to fundraise off people, but how could we engage them over the course of the weekend? So we took solar lamps and kerosene lamps. We built a stand where you could have your photograph taken with this lovely sunny backdrop. And sure enough, at the end of the weekend, we'd raise a few pounds in the bucket. And 6 weeks later, I get a phone call from a woman. She got talking to one of our staff at great length. She was horrified at the consequences of people using kerosene lamps and really inspired by what SolarAid's mission was. And she says, look, I know a foundation, but I'm not a trustee, but I can put you forward. And 9 months later, she did the presentation to the trustees of that foundation, and we secured one of our largest ever grants. So you could say that was luck, but it came about of a rethink. If we tried to push her for £5 a month on that stand, we would never have had that conversation. It was about that shift in direction. And you start to create more of these anecdotes that you collect and you share them. You can constantly share these anecdotes to start changing the culture within the organization, because as I found when I've gone back to SolarAid to work with them, I have these little anecdotes played back to me. Yeah, great, from staff I'd never met, I hadn't worked with, and so that starts to sort of instill a culture of, the reason we do this is because it helps get our story out.
Well, you start to realize that they're not just random anecdotes that happen by chance. It's like the more you put yourself out there, the more people you meet, the more people who talk about you, the more happens. Like it's the same in every industry for every organization. And I guess we have to realize it goes beyond luck. It's like playing the odds almost.
Yeah, and it's sort of it's harnessing that sort of 6 degrees of separation, like you said. And I think I've come to realize that it almost, don't get me wrong, the money does matter, but you can deliver far more on the mission, because you start to raise resources, including funds, that are much more mission related. You're much more likely to stick to the activities that are going to deliver on your mission, rather than chase money that means your organization gets distracted into doing something actually which is really a sort of sideshow to delivering on your overall goal. So I think it helps focus the entire organization as well, and sort of rallies them behind, and gets your staff, committed behind it.
I like it. That's good. That's good. Richard, you put, obviously if anyone gets a chance to see you speak, I would highly recommend it, or attend one of your sessions, or get you in to talk to them. But if people want to find you and read some of the stuff you write, because I do like your writing, where's the best place for them to find you?
So I started a blog before I began at SolarAid, just to say, look, I'm going to try things differently. I'm just going to share my learning as I go, and that's called iFundraiser. So if you simply Google iFundraiser, there's a WordPress blog, and that's what I tweet under as well. So I do a post when I feel moved to share something, maybe once a month or so. So catch it there, and then occasionally I do talks, but as you know, they're exhausting. So it's sort of making sure I've got the well prepared and an audience that are interested in what I've got to share.
And looking after yourself first.
Yeah, totally.
You got to take care of yourself.
I think that's the key. I think the new thing we're learning, isn't it, is there's this, you can sense that sort of well-being importance for those of us that work in the sector. And I think the reason I really advocate this approach is I think it will re-energize you as a fundraiser. It certainly re-energized me, because I was feeling rather battered, trying to deal with the sort of symptoms and not understanding the root cause. And once I understood the root cause, suddenly I saw what the direction was to go in. And I think that sort of gave me purpose, every week going into work at SolarAid. And I think that's really, really even more important now.
It's lovely, and your enthusiasm is contagious, which is why I always like talking to you, because you always get me excited again. Well, that's cool. Well, I highly recommend anyone who's listening, go find Richard, iFundraiser, iFundraiser on Twitter, iFundraiser on his website, and have a read of what he's talking about. But Richard, I really appreciate you taking the time. I know you have a busy schedule with your dog, so I appreciate you taking the time to speak to me.
No, not at all. It's a real pleasure, Simon. Continue doing what you're doing. It's fascinating, hearing your podcast, but also, just the mantra and the message that you're promoting as well.
Well, I'm glad you could finally make it on, Richard. It's great to see you and great to talk to you. And thank you so much, and we'll speak to you again soon.
You've been listening to Simon Scriver's Amazingly Ultimate Fundraising Superstar podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and head over to changefundraising.com to learn more or get in touch with Simon. Or don't, whatever, you're big enough to make your own decisions.
Hello, this is Morgan Freeman. For discounts on Simon's best-selling online fundraising courses, go to www.changefundraising.com/training and use coupon code podcast. Complete them in your own time, wherever you want. Get busy living or get busy buying.